one of the wonderful things that has come of this terrible pandemic is the kind of collaborations we can do electronically. And this collaboration this evening stems, as we'll hear, from the friendship between our two rabbis, and it has enabled us to put this evening together. I just want to, for those of you who do not know Ohavi Zedek Synagogue, we're in Burlington, Vermont. We're the oldest Jewish congregation in the state of Vermont, founded in the 1880s, conservative shul. And we are really delighted to be sharing this evening with you. I want to let you know that after the conversation and the discussion from Rabbi Buchdahl and the discussion between her and Rabbi Amy Small, who's our rabbi, we're going to proceed directly into an evening minyan. And the reason for this is that tonight, this very evening, is a very important evening in Ohavi Zedek's year, because Ohavi Zedek Synagogue has one central rabbi in our history, who is Rabbi Max Wall, who served for a very long time in the latter portion of the 20th century, and tonight is his yahrzeit. Rabbi Wall was by no means the founding rabbi of the synagogue, and he certainly is not the current rabbi, but he created Ohavi Zedek Synagogue as it is today, the modern Orthodox shul that we are. So we're going to proceed immediately after our discussion with Rabbi Buchdahl to a minyan at 7 o'clock, where we will say Kaddish for Rabbi Wall. And I particularly want to extend a welcome to Rabbi Wall's daughters and other family members who are here for this discussion and will also be here for our minyan. With that said, again, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Amy Small of OZ to pick things up.
Thank you so much, Nat. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, to have this gathering of our two communities. This feels like such a special night. To be able to share with you, Rabbi Buchdahl, means so much. We're so grateful to you, and delighted by the connections between families that this night brings about, and that we can continue to discuss and enjoy in the coming days and years ahead. I began this conversation with Rabbi Buchdahl because of the news, which has been difficult. The difficult news about violence and discrimination against people of the AAPI community. And we want to know how we can be an ally. And we understand that we need to understand together how Jews of color feel within the Jewish community as a beginning, and then to break down misconceptions that so many carry about the AAPI community. Rabbi Buchdahl, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Ohavi Zedek Synagogue tonight.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. You said that this began because you wanted to be an ally, but I want to say that this night really began because of the kindness of Ohavi Zedek's rabbi, because of you, Amy, because during this pandemic, I had a family where they moved up to their house in Vermont when the pandemic happened. Like, you probably were inundated up in Vermont with New Yorkers who moved up there when the pandemic happened, is my guess. But anyway, they moved up there, and very sadly, the father in the family has been battling ALS, and it became clear that he was never going to be able to move back to New York. And he was not even sure he was going to live to when their child's bat mitzvah was going to happen. So I quickly, within a month, said, let's make a bat mitzvah happen for your daughter, and we'll throw your son in there too at the same time, and let's do it next month. And they said, but we really want to be in a sanctuary. And I said, well, it happens that I know a beautiful community in Vermont. And I called Rabbi Small and I said, would you be willing to let this family be in your sanctuary while I stayed in my sanctuary? And we Zoomed in this magic of technology thing. And Amy didn't just open up Ohavi Zedek's sanctuary, but she was there and present and just helped this family feel like the Jewish community will stand with families everywhere. And I said to her afterward, I was so grateful, and it was such a kindness. And I said, if I can ever do anything. And she said, well, maybe sometime you can come speak up at OZ. And I said, great. The other reason I have to say that, of course, I wasn't going to be able to say no to your rabbi is because I feel like I owe Z a great deal for my own Jewish family, because my husband, Jacob Buchdahl, grew up at OZ. And I see Carol and Dave David. My in-laws are here, and it's really great to see them. They were at OZ for decades until they moved to southern Vermont. But while they were still up in Little Georgia, Vermont, I would go up there for Passover Seders. I've actually visited your sanctuary, which is beautiful, and we would have Passover Seders with Frank and Sherry, and I saw Sherry on the screen too, which is awesome. So it really feels like kind of a homecoming. So enough intro, but thank you. I'm going to actually begin with the fact that even though my husband and I grew up in synagogues that were across the country from each other, I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, that we had actually very similar Jewish experiences in our synagogues growing up. Our synagogues were about the same size. Our synagogues were, for both of us, basically, if you wanted anything Jewish, it all happened through the synagogue. There wasn't really any other Jewish life outside of it. To the extent that I remember when I was a kid growing up, it's not like you could go and just even buy matzah in the grocery store. Like if you wanted Passover supplies, the sisterhood ordered them. You came to the gift shop and you had to get your matzah and your gefilte fish from the sisterhood. So it was really the destination for everything Jewish. And we both were particularly gifted with a long time remarkable, intelligent, compassionate rabbi. My rabbi, Rabbi Richard Rosenthal of blessed memory, served my congregation for 41 years. And I know and have heard legends about Rabbi Max Wall, who served this community for a similarly long amount of time. And Carol and David in particular tell me a lot of Max and Mimi Wall stories. So I feel like I've known them. And I know that my children are inheritors of the legacy that these two wonderful rabbis brought to their communities. And I just want to share that and share that my husband and I had the opportunity to name a classroom at my children's Jewish day school, the Heschel School in New York. And so there is a classroom in New York that is called the Rabbi Max Wall and Rabbi Richard Rosenthal classroom. So I just wanted you to know that we feel very deeply connected. This is personal. It's not just, just a way of connecting Jewish communities, but I think there are many connections. So I want to share that especially, and I would like to dedicate our learning tonight to Rabbi Wall, whose yard site I'm privileged to be able to share in as well. So, okay.
Thank you so much. If I may also add,
Yes.
that was so beautiful. Thank you. It also is very moving to me that where we first met in person was in Tel Aviv.
It's true.
The Jewish world. Okay.
At a beautiful Shabbat service overlooking Mediterranean Sea. Yeah, exactly. So
well, tell us.
I'll tell you, okay, so I feel like I need to tell you a little bit about how I grew up to get some sense of like what it was like to grow up as basically the only Asian Jewish family that I knew in Tacoma. My father did ROTC after college and ended up in South Korea, and he ended up meeting my mother. They fell in love. They got married. They had 2 kids, me and my sister Gina. We were both born in South Korea. And then when I was about 5 years old, we moved to Tacoma, Washington. And my father, he was already a 3rd generation Tacoman. So we had a lot of roots, I guess because my Jewish ancestors were woodworkers from Romania, and the Pacific Northwest had the most trees. I'm not sure how they ended up there, but that's the family lore. They had a family millworking business that was 100 years it ran, serving 3 generations of my Warnick family. So I grew up in this very tight-knit but small Jewish community where everyone took care of each other, where I felt like I had yichus, I had like roots, and I was so grateful that my rabbi immediately embraced my non-Jewish Korean mother and my family, and never once questioned that we were fully Jewish and a part of the community. I will say that my parents sent me to McCarver Elementary School, which was the first school for voluntary desegregation in the country. Is basically a magnet program where instead of forcibly busing people into a neighborhood that was primarily Black, that we chose to go there because they put some really wonderful programming there. And my parents put me on a bus at age 5, and I went to McCarver Elementary School, which was still more than 50% a Black community when I attended. So I had a very diverse school where we sang the Black national anthem at every assembly, and I had a Black is Beautiful alphabet around my classroom. And my mother started bringing her Korean siblings to America, and the Korean community really got very big. And so it's the 4th largest Korean community in all of America is the Tacoma, Seattle area. So here I was having an incredibly diverse incredibly diverse school community, and I have all this Korean family, and I spent a lot of time with them. And the only time that I was in a community that looked all white was when I went to synagogue, ironically. And so it was a funny experience. Now, luckily, everyone was, as I said, so embracing of my family. But I will share that my mother was treated like such a beloved guest. But at a couple of points in her life, she actually considered conversion. But I think the reason she never did is because she was treated always as a beloved guest. What I mean by that is she was always treated like, come back anytime. We really welcome you. But she was never really told, you could be a part of us. You could join us. It's kind of like saying, come to my club. You can swim in my pool anytime you want. You can go, golf with me anytime you want. But there was never an invitation of, why don't you actually become a member yourself? And so I think that there was a part of her that never felt like she was ever truly given that kind of a welcome, or that she would ever really fully fit in as a Korean immigrant. So I would say that my sister and I grew up always like the only Jews in our school. In our high school, which had 1,400 kids, my sister and I were 2 out of the 3 Jews in the whole school. It's probably not an experience that's particularly unfamiliar for people from Vermont. My husband had a similar experience with his sister at Bellows Free Academy in St. Albans. And I remember that I was the Jewish representative. I was the president of my youth group, and I was called upon to light the menorah at the Hanukkah assembly. And I used to joke that, like, in Tacoma, people thought that Jews looked like me and my sister because we were what Judaism looked like to them. And it was a little bit of a rude awakening when I left the kind of comfort and bubble of my safe Tacoma Jewish community, which had embraced me and knew my family for 3 generations, and to go out into the wider Jewish world. The first time I did that was going to Camp Swig in California, which is a Jewish camp there, and I couldn't believe how many people kept saying to me, are you Jewish? I said, aren't we at a Jewish camp? Isn't it obvious? But they couldn't get over the fact that they were looking at me and I didn't look Jewish, so they kept asking me if I was Jewish. I started wearing a Jewish star necklace, which my grandmother had gotten me when she went to Israel. But I started wearing it because I wanted an outward sign that I'm Jewish. And I thought it would stop all the questions. But in some ways, the wearing the necklace only invited more questions. Do you know what that star means? Wait, how are you Jewish? And I would say that most of the time, the questions came out of curiosity, out of maybe ignorance, out of the fact that I recognized it was unusual. But the effect of it was very much making me feel like I had to kind of always explain myself and sometimes defend my position. And I could always tell when it changed from curiosity to interrogation or challenge, which it sometimes did as well. I would say that when I got to Israel for the first time, which was on a trip when I was 16, that was when I had one of the greatest kind of identity challenges because I had Jews from all stripes. It was a pluralistic program. And I had an Orthodox roommate who said, if you have a non-Jewish mother, you're not Jewish. And you can imagine that was like a core of my identity. It was like who I represented in the larger community. And for the first time when I was 16, someone said, but that's not even really who you are. She wasn't trying to be mean. It was just her definition. This was devastating to me. And I think it's only because I've got my mom's like fighter spirit that my reaction to that was not to leave the Jewish community, but to say, well, by the end of that summer, I was like, I think I want to be a rabbi. So that was sort of a response. And I'm going to fast forward and just say that now I went back to Camp Swig a couple more times. The first time was in 1986. When I went back in 1994, it had already changed. We had campers who were mixed race kids or kids, Jews of color. In particular, there were a number of Asian Jews at the camp as campers by the time I got there, even a decade later. My synagogue, Central, has quite a diverse community. I'm talking race is one of the ways it's diverse. It's actually diverse in a million different ways. But when you look out, it's much more diverse. My guess is that in Vermont, which is a much it's still, I think, one of the whiter states in the Union. My guess is that Ohavei Tzedek doesn't have as many Jews of color in it. But I think you'd be surprised to know that Jews of color in America, a recent survey shows, is between 12 to 15% of American Jews. Now, 12 to 15% is like 1 out of every 7 Jews. That's actually like about what is that? It's 1 million Jews, I believe, out of our number of about 13 million or something. 8 million, excuse me. So it's a huge number. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how is that possible? I've never seen them. It's not just being in Vermont. I'll tell you that even in New York, you don't see that percentage of Jews in synagogues. And it's partly because of the way the Jewish community has not yet fully embraced and made Jews of color feel welcome. Now, here is the irony. The way of making someone feel welcome is not by saying, welcome, where did you come from? Because if you're a Jew of color and you walk in and you're treated like you're a stranger, that's how you kind of always feel. And I guess this is the tricky part, because I have a congregant who he's African American, and I want just to tell you what his experience was of Central. And here is Central. It's in New York. You've got an Asian rabbi that's the senior rabbi. You'd think, oh, we've really got this figured out. Well, he told me that the first time he came, that the security guard trailed him in and eyed him suspiciously. And then you had him say that almost every week, and he's a regular, he comes almost every Friday night, people will say, where are you from? Which is a very nice question, but when you are a Jew of color and that you get asked that every single week, it actually doesn't feel particularly welcoming. It feels like saying, you don't belong here. Where are you from? Or he's been asked, just the question of course, are you Jewish, which is a regular question, but even, what neighborhood are you from? And I tried to frame this for my community recently over the holidays as, imagine that if someone walked into an exclusive fancy boutique, like a Prada store or something like that, and they were African American, and the security guard trailed them in and looked at him when he came in. And imagine that like he was looking at, walking around the store, and he was having overly solicitous questions like, where are you from? What are you doing here? We would see that as being very racist, a way of saying basically somehow you don't belong here. And that's what those questions are saying. So a true welcome is actually treat someone like you assume that they're already part of this family. I can't tell you how many Jews of color said, I just wish people would just assume that I was Jewish. And if someone's not, you don't have to, they won't be offended, because they're in a synagogue. So why not make that assumption? The much harder thing is when people keep sort of challenging why they're there or do they belong. One last thing I just want to say, which is we talk a lot about whether or not we want to be colorblind. That used to be the goal, be colorblind. I don't see color. I think that's not really the way people of color want to be seen now. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think that the prevailing feeling is, please see me for who I am. And I want to be seen as fully Jewish, but I also don't want that to mean that you stop seeing me as Korean. And I think that when I remember that in college, I had a friend of mine say to me after I led services, she said, Angela, you just look Jewish to me now. And I think she meant that obviously as a compliment, but it felt really funny because I thought to myself, well, so I didn't look Jewish before? And what does it mean, I look Jewish now? What does that even mean? And I understood also in a certain way, it meant that I didn't look Korean to her anymore. And I want to be able to be all those things. And I want that to be the fullness of who I am as a Jew, because my Koreanness is a very big part of who I am as a Jew and as a rabbi and a human being. It's as much as who I am as a woman. It's like, we used to also not have women who were rabbis, and we used to always be called female rabbi, and I used to always be the Asian rabbi. Sometimes it's nice to just be rabbi and not have all those qualifiers that make you feel like you're not the norm. So I guess that's a place to start. I could keep talking for a lot, but I actually am curious where you want to take this conversation, Rabbi, and where people are curious for the questions. And one of the things I'd like to say now, I'm not easily offended. If I did, I could never have gotten to where I am now after all the things I've heard. When I recognize that the question is coming from a genuine desire to learn, you're not going to offend me, and I really hope that this can feel like a safe place where you can ask questions. So with that, I turn it to you, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you. I invite all of you who are here with us together, if you'd like to post any questions in the chat box, we'll do our best to sort them and see how much we can accomplish. Thank you so much, Rabbi Buchdahl. In your community, what do people call you? Do they call you Rabbi Buchdahl?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
They do. But I mean, or Angela. The one thing I'm not usually is Rabbi Angela. But I'm also very happy to, in this context, you can just call me Angela.
Okay, great, great. That's also another one of those funny conversations about changing.
I know.
Not only for women, although especially for women, but also for the changing role of the rabbi in American Judaism, another conversation for another day. And, so you were ordained at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. You're also ordained as a cantor, right?
Yes, in 99 and then 2001, I was a rabbi.
So you finished your cantorial studies first. Was that an intentional, I'm going to do this, then that, or did you have some stops along the way? I asked that because I had stops along the way, so I'm curious.
I grew up in this beautiful small synagogue that never had a cantor. So I only wanted to go to rabbinical school because those were the role models I had. And at camp, I saw lots of rabbis, but no cantors also. So I went to rabbinical school. When I was in rabbinical school, I realized, wait a minute, I really love music and I'm missing out on something very big that's a part of my Jewish soul and drew me to Judaism. So I basically kind of did both programs semi-simultaneously, but they forced me to pick one and then do the other. So I did cantorial school and then rabbinic school. Kind of, honestly, I did them pretty simultaneously, but they gave me one degree and then the other.
Interesting. And you have been at Central Synagogue for a while now. You were serving, before you became the senior rabbi, you were serving as...
I served as the senior cantor from 2006 to 14, so like eight years. And so, and I'm in my 7th year as the senior rabbi. Yeah.
So in your role as rabbi, how has this question of identity, being Korean and Jewish in ways that you feel is the blossoming of who you are in totality, how has that played out for you? That is, have people challenged you because of your identity? Have they treated you differently? Have they asked questions? How has that played out for you?
When I was younger, I got the questions all the time. And when I was a younger rabbi or cantor, I would get them every time I entered new communities. But I think part of the reason that I could have stuck with this for as long as I have is once I actually am in a community for a while, or not even that long, once people know me, then it's just not an issue anymore. And I've really felt very embraced by the communities I've been a part of. And that's been a blessing. My Tacoma one, my Scarsdale community for a decade, and of course Central. So I think that people just see me for who I am and the fullness of that, and that's been a blessing. I think that one of the things that has been an impact for me is that like I always felt like I was the odd one out, like the outsider that like really wore my multiple identities on my face. But one of the things I've come to know as I learn people's Jewish stories, is how much I think people are very complicated, and almost everyone has multiple identities they're navigating, whether or not it's like, I'm a single person and I never had children, and I feel like, this community, it's all about family, and I feel like I'm a little outside, or I feel like I'm a I'm LGBTQ and this community, it's much more open and welcoming now. But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was really hard to juggle being like, how do I marry being gay and being Jewish, or, being Black and being Jewish? So, like, I guess part of what I would like to say is that what I realize is I wear outwardly and understand in that way what I think almost every human being, honestly, is trying to navigate. And wanting to try to come to some wholeness of all those things and not feel like they're all compartmentalized, but they can be one.
Beautiful. There are two questions. I'm going to throw them both at you first, and you decide how you'd like to begin with our questions. One is from Marv Greenberg, who is one of our Minion captains and one of the leaders of our community, who talks about how he likes to welcome people and ask where they're from. Especially in Burlington, we have a lot of tourists and people who come through, and we want to make sure we have a minion. And so he might ask if they're Jewish. And he's wondering if you would comment on, is this appropriate? He doesn't want anybody to be offended. Thank you for your sensitivity, Marvin, asking that question. And then the next one from Yoram Samitz is, how is your synagogue navigating the current racial issue that we're all trying to figure out? That's a big question. So wherever you'd like to go next.
Whew. Well, I think I'll start with Marv's, and I really appreciate the question, Marv. And I guess one of the things I think if you approach someone who, quote, looks Jewish, and you say, where are you from? They will not feel sensitive to that question. And if they say, I'm not Jewish, they'll probably tell you that. I guess what I want to alert you to is if someone walks in and you might imagine that they might have been asked this question in ways before, or they don't look Jewish in sort of your stereotypical ways. I want you to imagine that they're carrying a little bit of a wound of feeling that they have been challenged about whether or not they truly belong. And so they're going to hear that question in a different way. So if you see it, I guess part of what I'd say is Davka, especially for the people who might look like they don't look, that aren't Jewish, that you would just say, would you like a prayer book? And just say, where are you from? And like, do you belong to a Jewish community? And just ask the questions you'd ask of someone who walks in and looks like Milt Steinberg, like just like whatever it is, like it, and I think if you sort of treat them, it's refreshing and great. When I've walked into a community I don't know and they treat me like that, I feel so just grateful. So just that there's a different sensitivity. That's all I would say. In terms of how are we navigating this racial moment, oh my goodness, that's a big question. I'm not sure exactly where people want to go with that. But I guess part of what I'd say is we're dealing with it on a lot of levels. One is we're looking at it from an internal perspective, meaning how are we thinking about race as a synagogue? How are we educating our community on this? How are we having discussions? So this is like bringing in some speakers, reading some books, giving sermons on this. And then we're looking at it from an operational level. Like we're looking at issues like this is probably much more significant for a team like ours, but we ask questions about, well, we started 5 years ago with like a $15 minimum wage, for example, back when that was not a thing. And because we realized that the people of color on our own staff were among the least paid and that we wanted to be able to model that. So that's actually a race issue for us when we think about that. When we've talked about whether or not how we act out in the wider world as well. So, do we care about where we spend our money for all of our own eggs, and are we frequenting minority-owned businesses? These are some of the questions we're thinking about because where we spend our resources are also a reflection of our value. Are we just being mindful of it in any way? And then we look at it from a much bigger advocacy level, and how can we be working on racial justice outside of the Jewish community? And we've been really deeply involved in criminal justice reform around ending mass incarceration has been sort of a focus of our social justice work. So that's like, I guess, on one foot, like we're trying to look at it from a small Jewish community, then like how we set models of how we operate, and then how we do advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, these questions are so rich, and the next two sort of go together. So I'm going to pose them together. By the way, we're not going to be taking voice questions, just chat questions. So I'm sorry that we're not going to do the hand raise and verbal, but the chat. Thank you for doing that. And thank you all for these deep questions. So there's a question about the topic of matrilineal, patrilineal descent. You're a Reform rabbi leading in the Reform movement and in your Reform congregation. We're a USCJ conservative affiliated congregation where matrilineal descent is the rule according to halakha, and patrilineal descent is not. So we're really dealing with questions about the changing demographics of our community, and this is a very real question for many people. So they want to know what you think about that, which also has some connection to the next question, and that is, do you think it's okay to ask non-Jewish congregants if they'd like to convert? Have you done that? Is that your approach? I know that in the Reform movement, there have been some leaders suggesting that, and a long story that's been an interest of mine for a long time as well. But curious to know how you feel about that. So let's take what you'd like to do with those two questions.
Okay, why don't I start with that question first? I think what Judaism has to offer is so beautiful and so deeply meaningful. And I think when people find it, I think we should be unabashed in making it open to anyone who's interested. We have a kind of a very tribal insularity about us, which I think there are benefits to that feeling, but there are also ways that we really close ourselves off from others in that way. And I want to challenge us to think about, I recognize there's actually some discomfort sometimes from opening up our community in a way that we no longer can always recognize the tribal markers. What I mean by that is I want to share a brief story. I had this in my sermon as well, but I remember I did a wedding meeting with a couple, and she was not Jewish, and the husband to be was, and he really wanted his wife to convert, and she was a very spiritual person. She was open to it, but her own husband, or to be, couldn't really articulate what about Judaism was important. You probably know what this is like. Those people who just feel like, I feel it in my bones, it's really important to me. But when they say, well, so what does it mean to you? You never go to services, you don't keep a kosher home, you don't really keep Shabbat. Like, what does it mean? His response was, it's just like it's like a cultural feeling. It's like that sense that, I can walk into a party and I can just pick out the Jews in the room. That was his response. Now, of course, I couldn't help myself. I said, you mean like your wife and your rabbi? Because she was like a Texas wasp that you would definitely not guess to be Jewish, and me as well. So what I point to though is, and I've had this conversation with my husband. He also though says when you come from a place like Vermont, and when he got to college and there were a lot more Jews, he was excited to pick out the Jews in the room. And I said, I get that. And when you feel like there's similarities, like, we got the same last names, we eat the same foods, so you can kind of pick us out. There's a Judar, as people say, or whatever. I get that, and there's a comfort in that. So it's going to have to stretch us a little bit to think about, maybe you won't be able to pick us out just by the way we look, but there's something to be gained by the expansion of the Jewish community to include anyone who really deeply wants to be a part of this larger mission of the Jewish people. And to me, that's like a march towards liberating all people being more free, like just a embrace of Torah values and a way of, and a calendar for a sacred life. There's so much more I could say about that, but essentially I would say that yes, Central Synagogue's approach is, we welcome all of you, and we're going to make it very easy, and we're going to make that door really wide open. So we invested in this and hired a rabbi 12 years ago who exclusively does conversion classes. We don't call it conversion class because there's zero pressure. There's just deep invitation. And she now has 3 rabbis working with her. She does this full time, and she has 180 students a year right now. This has grown and grown. She has helped make over, some crazy huge number of Jews in the last 12 years. It's something like 500 Jews. And that's not even counting that each of them have like 2.2 children that become Jewish children as well. So I think that I would invite us to like unabashedly open our hearts to anyone who's interested in Judaism, and not to, I know that we used to say you have to turn away a person 3 times. If they want to convert you, you turn them away 3 times to test, I guess, if they're really serious. I think that was from an era when Jews would get killed if we converted anyone. So I would just say we should be more fully embracing of welcoming anyone who wants to come in. Secondly, without pressure to convert. Secondly, the distinction for me, and I obviously come from my own particular historical background of having a non-Jewish mother, the distinction for me between having a Jewish mother or a Jewish father, I don't understand why we are holding on to this idea of this Jewish bloodline in a very specific way. And yes, it is the traditional halacha now, but I will just remind people that in the Bible, it was actually traced through the father, so it was the other way around. So at some point in Jewish history, we changed it to the mother. In my mind, that just tells you that it doesn't really matter all that much. Like if you have Jewish ancestry and you identify as a Jew and you practice as a Jew, which is the rule in the Reform movement on patrilineal descent, you have to actually practice as a Jew and learn as a Jew. You can't just have Jewish parentage. But then you're considered a Jew. And I will tell you that as a person who grew up embraced by my Jewish community, it was so important that it wasn't just a question that I was like half Jewish or not a real Jew. And when I did get challenged when I was 16, I would say it was deeply, deeply painful. I will say that the end of the story is that when I was 21, I ended up actually doing a giur process, which some people would call a conversion, but I didn't think of it as conversion because that's a very not Jewish word. Giur to me, when we think about people who convert to Judaism, it's like they found the Jewish soul that was always in them. So I called it a reaffirmation ceremony, but I did have a beit din of 3 rabbis, and I went to a mikveh, and I had a traditional halachic dip. And I did that when I was 21, even though I was Jewish my whole life, because there was a part of me that understood at that moment I didn't want to just be a Jew under Reform Jewish definitions, but in the wider Jewish world. I also did it because I wanted to, in some ways, acknowledge that my Korean family shaped me, and so then it wasn't the same as just having 2 Jewish parents. But it was complicated and hard. And I think that at certain moments, if I wasn't hardwired the way I was, the challenge to me being Jewish could have turned me away forever. And I will say that my sister, who was raised in the same exact household as me, went to synagogue just like me, went on the same Israel program as me. She's not practicing as a Jew today. She is not raising her children as Jews today because she got the same challenge. But my beautiful, spiritual, musical sister, who has a much more sensitive heart than me, and less of like the kind of fighter, and I don't mean that as a critique, I mean that as like she's just a better person than me. But she was so hurt by the way she was treated by the Jewish community that she was like, why do I want to be a part of this? And I'll share one really very painful story. When she was in Israel with a group of 25 peers, and they all got to know each other, and she was very musical even back then. Her last Shabbat, the group said, "Oh, Gina, you have to lead us in Havdalah," because she'd been song leading and playing music, and she said, "Okay, great." One of the traditional members of the group pulled her aside before the Havdalah and said, "When you say the blessings, instead of saying Adonai Eloheinu, say Hashem Elokeinu." And my sister didn't understand that what that did was essentially invalidate the blessing. It's not a blessing if you don't say God's name. And what they were doing was they didn't feel that the blessing was valid coming out of my sister's mouth. And so when she said Hashem Elokeinu, they, under their breath, said the real blessing. And they didn't have the respect to even tell her the truth. They just basically publicly humiliated her. That's not what they intended. What they intended was to keep the law, but what they did was publicly humiliate her. And after that experience, I feel like she sort of said, if this is what Judaism is about, that you actually care more about upholding this particular law than the soul of a human being, why do I want to be a part of this? So I just want us to think about that when we think about these rules that we have created that I understand are deeply important for us having some boundaries and understanding our definitions and who we are. But if we're not also keeping our eye on ultimately, what is this all about? I think that what is, then we have lost sight of what Judaism really stands for.
It's such a powerful reflection. Thank you so much for sharing those personal stories, which I think if we had hours, we could continue to hear other personal stories from other folks here about the personal challenge of identity today in relation to halakha and in relation to the unity of the Jewish people, which gets very messy and uncomfortable from time to time, which you've just reflected on by telling us your story. I really appreciate that. One of our folks asked, when a person is a Jew by choice, this comes from Judy, and is also a minority, how do you help make that person feel welcome? As both of these cause people to not know how to behave.
I think just treat them like you would treat everyone else, honestly. Meaning that, like, not kind of continually remind them. There's a lot of halacha around you don't remind a convert or call them a convert, right? So I think just treating them like deeply as just a part of the community is partly probably what they want. That being said, there's a tension between treating them just like everyone else and sometimes every once in a while with the right context, enabling them to share their story. If they want to share their journey of why they chose Judaism, and they do that in the right context in a way that's elevated and respectful and gives them dignity, I also think that that is deeply important because they don't want to, it's that tension between, like, I want you to treat me just like everyone else and not always feel like I'm different. And I also want you to know this is who I am and this has shaped me. So that I think that tension is not just about the convert or the Jew of color. I think each one of us wants some of that. We want to belong, and we also want to feel like our unique story and who we are is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to go back to the title that was on the flyer that we co-created, Jewish Diversity and Debunking the, quote, Jews as a Race Myth, a conversation regarding the recent spate of anti-Asian violence and its impact. That's huge. And we haven't really touched on those themes. What would you like to share about that?
Okay, well, the Jews as a race myth. I'll just start with that, I guess, which is first of all, race itself is its own social construct. So how do you decide what race really is? And people really have this idea that this is like scientific. You've got like these kinds of genes. Really, we all share 99.9% of the same genes. It's just like, and basically, it's interesting the way it works. Race works in our country. That, like, you could have 3/4 white blood and 1/4 African American blood, and if you appear black, you'll just be called black, even if you're actually majority something else. So this just helps understand, like, the weirdness of, like, this quote sort of scientific way that we talk about something as if it's set when it's really not, and we're constantly kind of deciding those boundaries. One of the things that have become much more clear to me in recent years, learning Jewish history, reading books about race, in particular reading the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which I highly recommend to people if you haven't already read it.
We're reading.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you're reading it. Is the idea that race is really the product of racism, not the other way around, meaning that people who want to actually create hierarchies of value, of human value, actually emphasize this idea of racial difference. And that's been throughout history. I will tell you, from the Jewish perspective, that's also true. The first time we were really kind of spoken about like a race was by Pharaoh in Egypt, who talked about us as like, oh, they're multiplying and they're getting out of control, and we can't control them. They're sort of this group. Of course, during the Spanish Inquisition, it was about our bloodline, like something that was immutable, unchangeable. If you read Caste, you'll understand that, like, that kind of language about sort of this identity that you can't escape, that you're born into, that even when they told us we had to convert or we would get killed, that when we converted, they'd say, well, you're not like real because you don't have purity of blood, limpieza de sangre, right? So there's this, I'm telling you this and then of course Hitler was maybe one of the most egregious examples of making Jews a race, including like pictures of our nose shapes and our eyes and the color of our skin, and the entire genocide of Judaism was based on this myth that we are actually a race of people. And even Jews who converted to Christianity, he would count them as Jews, many of them. So the point is, race has been created by our enemies, almost always used for bad purposes. So let's not hold on to this kind of romantic idea that people have that somehow we are a race. I say romantic idea because when I gave my sermon on this Yom Kippur on race, I had several congregants comment to me afterward, but Rabbi, I've done the DNA test and I'm like, and it says that I'm 99.9% Ashkenazi DNA. So Judaism is a race. And I said, well, first of all, if you read up on how those things are, basically what they can do is show that you have the same gene pool as people from that same area. So, okay, yes, you have the same gene pool as other people who were Ashkenazi from the same part of Poland you were from. But there are Jews from Iraq who've been there for 2,000 years or longer. They also have a Jewish genetic gene pool. It's not going to match yours from Poland. And there are Jews who've been in Ethiopia for centuries. They're going to have a very different gene pool also. So the idea that there's sort of a Jewish race, again, holding on to that idea to me is a mythology that actually hurts our community. And so I want to say that. And it contributes to this wrong notion that there's a way to look. It's actually only, America, we have an Ashkenazi sort of assumption that has come from like large waves of Ashkenazi immigration, which include my grandparents. But I think that we need to understand that throughout all of Jewish history, we've actually been much more multiplicitous. I don't even think that that's the right word, but we've had a multitudes before. So I'll stop there. I don't know if there's other parts of that you want to explore or other people want to explore.
Well, the subtitle that we created for, wait, let me just get this taken care of. Okay, the subtitle that we created for our flyer, a conversation regarding the recent spate of anti-Asian violence and its impact. This began with our community at Ohavi Zedek wanting to address what is deeply troubling to us as a challenge in our world and our society, and there are so many challenges. We've had cast as one of the books, as many that we are reading and talking about for the last few years. We've been talking about issues of race, but the anti-Asian violence was a wake-up call that we need another chapter to this conversation, that is often overlooked. Can you speak to how we can get with it?
Mm-hmm. I think that just like anti-Semitism is its own particular brand of hatred and bigotry, anti-Asian bias is also its own brand of hatred and bigotry. And I say that because I think for a long time, people ignored that there was really a lot of racism because there was sort of a sense, or that there was a problem for Asians because actually Asians, I think, in this country have not really found sort of their political power and voice yet, and not particularly organized. If anything, there's been kind of a cultural response to harm, which is basically let's keep our head down and not make waves. That's sort of been the Asian response. That's a big generalization, but you can see that we don't have nearly the same kinds of advocacy organizations in the Asian community as you see, for example, in the Jewish community. The Jewish community is a fraction of the size of the Asian community, but we have 10 times as many advocacy and other kinds of speak out and political organizations than the Asian community. So the Asian community is finding our voice, but it's not organized that way. So there's a sort of a invisibility. The second is one of the kind of natures of the bigotry against Asians is seen as like the model minority myth. You've probably heard that. Now, people don't see that as bigotry because they say that's not racism because we're saying good things about Asians. They're good at math. They're good at computers. They're hardworking. Now, listen. Those could be nice things, but you have to know that anytime you make a gross generalization about an entire people, even if you think it's positive, it's still a stereotype that can do a lot of harm and not allow people to kind of have their own individuality. I want you to reflect for a moment about how the Jewish people are often seen that way too. Sometimes Jews don't know that when we are saying stereotypes of Jews that we see as positive, also, they're so hardworking. They're so smart. They're taking up all the Ivy League spots. We have the most Nobel Prize winners. We run the media. We're powerful in all these areas. Um, I want you to know, while many of those things are, have basis in fact, that even when they're positive, you should know when they're a big generalization like that, it can still be deeply problematic and it can turn on a dime. I just want you to know there's an expression that I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's basically a Philo-Semite, someone who loves Jews. A Philo-Semite is just an anti-Semite who likes Jews, meaning it's still dangerous. And I say that because very quickly saying Jews are so good and all in like, have done so well, and they take up all, they're in all the Ivy League schools, or they do so well in these positions of power, can also very quickly turn to they're running the media, they control the government, they are stealing slots. I mean, so I just want you to understand that, not to mention that it doesn't actually make room for Jews who want to be in other different ways and don't see themselves fitting into that stereotype. It's a trap. So I think that like people don't recognize the racism against Asians because they still continue to see this as the sort of positive way they're viewed. And lastly, I guess what I'd like to say is there is a way that Asians feel like we are perpetually foreigners in American land, in a way that the Jewish community, when we immigrated here, we felt like foreigners. But I think that Jews feel, by and large, deeply like Americans in America. And I would say that for Asians, I think partly because we can be so easily physically separated out from people who look white, there's a way that Asians have always been seen as a perpetual foreigner. And I just want to give a couple of examples that I just have thought about recently. One is just that I remember that when Christy Yamaguchi won an ice skating Olympic medal, that she was always referred to as Japanese American. I couldn't find a single thing that called her just an American. She was already a third generation in America. She didn't speak a speck of Japanese. Her grandfather or something like that had fought in World War I, and then her family was interned in World War II. And I just remember thinking, wow, are we always going to be a hyphenated? Like there's American, but you're always going to be Korean American or Japanese American, and then there's some sense that like I don't want to be denied that piece, but I also want to feel sometimes like you don't have to always qualify it and make me separate. The next thing I just want to say is there's a fabulous movie called Minari. It is that just won a couple of Oscars, but it was in the category, I think, for the Golden Globes. I should have studied this to tell you the story right, but for foreign film. And it won for Best Foreign Film. Okay, so I just want you to know that it was made in America, and it was filmed in America, and it is actually the story of Korean immigrants who like live out, in some ways, the most quintessential, American dream. And now, granted, a lot of the script is done in Korean because you have Korean immigrants who speak to each other in Korean in the movie. There's also, of course, English. But I just thought to myself, isn't that interesting? This is such an American story, actually. And everything about it was American, but they called it a foreign film. And I just like, that to me was like, just summed up like what it is, some of the struggles, I think, of the Asian community in America.
Wow, that says a lot. That says a lot. I haven't seen the movie yet.
It's so fabulous. It's amazing. I
Now
mean,
I'm,
maybe I had obviously a particularly emotional response because the grandmother reminds me of my own mother so much. I couldn't
uh,
get over it, but
wow. Okay, so now I'll talk to you about it after I see it. I'm thinking back to this past year during the pandemic. Um, when January of last year, February hit, and it started to look like there might be a pandemic because of this very contagious virus coming uh, from country to country. My son, who is the deputy director of an organization called Justice is Global, he called me up and he said, Ima, they're calling it the China virus. This is terrible. It's going to bring hatred and violence on Asians, and we have to do something about that. And like it was my first awakening to, it's not just a pandemic. It is a different kind of pandemic. Can you talk about how this has felt and looked to you during this time?
um, yeah, well, I mean, I think that one of the things we've understood is that, I mean, this pandemic has been really hard. But I guess one of the things that we've noticed almost more than anything else is hatred is a pandemic as well, and it feels like it can be contagious in the same way. Like you have someone calling this the China flu, that helps actually spread hate. It becomes contagious when people use that kind of language. And I guess one of the things that I think we've learned is how much people can spread that. But we also understand and have seen some of the power of how people can also vaccinate themselves against, that kind of language. And I think vaccinate's not even quite the right word, but we really need to eradicate that. And I think that, like, in the same way that you finally, when you get it under control, when you only have such small pockets that they no longer can kind of spread, and that's like, we have to do that as well. Like, we have to kind of take that hatred that we've seen, and there's just been it's not that I think that there's more racism right now. I just think that we see it in a different way because of this pandemic. So if this pandemic helped us see that, then maybe that's one of the most important things we could have seen, and now we just have to do something about it in the same way that we fought this pandemic. So,
And what do you suggest we do?
oh my goodness, with my 2 minutes left, I should come up with a solution for hate. I mean, I listen, I am like a hopeless optimist about human beings, and I really do think that when we actually meet each other and hear each other's stories and know each other across lines of difference, I don't actually think that we can hate people once we're in relationship and we know them. And I really think that that has relationships, love, knowing, that has actually built all those bridges that enable change. And I think that, for example, I think that it was really one thing to be able to, have a lot of anti-LGBTQ like legislation when people said, when people didn't know anyone who was gay, but then suddenly when it was like their friend or their son or their neighbor, then, you can't actually, it's easy to hate like a theory or a philosophy or a name of a people. But when you actually have a human being in front of you, it changes the way you think. So I think that part of this is about building more relationships like what we're able to do here. I really appreciate that you all took the time to hear some of my own stories, and I hope that it enables you to have a little more empathy for what it feels like to be a Jew of color, an Asian in America. And I appreciate that you took the time to listen. And I do think that in some small way, these are the ways that we fight it. And I really appreciate you inviting me.
We are so grateful to you. We really appreciate your presence, your wisdom, your story, your sharing yourself with your heart with us. And we just feel very fortunate to have had this time with you.
Thank you.
And when things start to open up and you can come to Vermont and we can go to Manhattan, even
Yes,
better, right?
that would be wonderful. I would love that.
That would be fantastic. So much gratitude. And to all of you from Central Synagogue who are here, we look forward to having a chance.
I know I see some of my my most loyal folks here. It's so awesome to see you. Ron and Freddie and Jerry and Ed and Alyssa and it's just, oh, and the Spaniards. It's really so nice. There are 4 screens. Karen, I see you. They're a really like a very nice group of people from everywhere.
Wow, fantastic.
Awesome.
Okay, so now here's what we're going to do. We're going to transition to Minyan. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Angela. Much love
Thank
to your
you.
community. And what I'd like to do now